The American dream isn't stolen by masked men in the dark. It is dismantled piece by piece in a sterile family courtroom, rubber stamped by a system that turns a man's honest sweat into a stranger's tax-free salary. The smell of Pennzoil, burnt iron, and the sharp metallic bite of brake cleaner was the only perfume David ever cared for. At 32, his hands were mapped with the permanent dark grease lines that no amount of industrial pumice soap could ever entirely erase. He was a broad-shouldered man, built like the heavy iron engine blocks he hoisted out of rusted Chevy Silverados. But his eyes had the quiet, defensive gentleness of someone who had learned early that strength was something you held back, not something you pushed forward. David's world was standard automotive repair on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. The garage, Miller & Sons Auto, had belonged to his uncle, who left it to David along with a stack of commercial debt and 3 bays of reliable, local clientele. David worked 12-hour days. He didn't mind the deep ache in his lower back or the winter chill that seeped through the concrete floor straight into his boots. He believed in the old-world American equation. You put in the honest hours, you give a man a fair price on his transmission, and the world leaves you with enough for a small brick home, a cold beer on Friday, and a sense of quiet dignity. Then came Jessica. She had rolled into the third bay on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, her 2012 Honda Civic, making a horrific metal-on-metal grinding noise from the front passenger wheel well. When she stepped out, she looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of grease-stained calendars and stacks of discarded Goodyear tires. She was 26, with perfectly applied makeup that resisted the Dayton humidity, and an air of fragile distress that hit David right in his protective instincts. "It's making a terrible sound," she had said, her voice dropping into a soft, helpless cadence. "The guy down the road said it's going to cost $2,000. I don't have that kind of money. I'm just trying to get to my classes." David pulled the wheel off. It wasn't a $2,000 fix. It was a completely disintegrated brake pad that had eaten into the rotor, a $300 job, tops. He looked at her, saw the slight tremor in her hands, and felt a surge of old-school chivalry. "Tell you what," David said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I've got the parts in the back. I'll charge you for the rotor and the pads, and we'll forget about the labor. Just pay it forward." Jessica's eyes lit up, a sudden, brilliant flash of gratitude that made David's chest tighten. "You'd really do that for a stranger?" "My granddad taught me you don't kick people when they're down," David muttered, feeling his cheeks redden beneath the smudge of carbon. They were married 14 months later. Looking back, the warning signs were there, buried like tiny hairline fractures in a cylinder head that looked perfect on the outside. David had met Jessica's mother, Evelyn, exactly twice before the wedding. Evelyn lived in a beautifully furnished townhouse in a wealthy suburb of Columbus, despite the fact that no one in the family could quite explain what she did for a living. During the rehearsal dinner, Evelyn had taken a long sip of her white wine, looked at David's calloused hands, and smiled a cold, transactional smile. "David," she had whispered, "a man's value isn't in what he says. It's in his capacity to provide security. The law understands that, even if young men sometimes forget it." David had laughed it off, thinking it was just the cynical rambling of a twice-divorced woman. He didn't know the history. He didn't know that Evelyn's townhouse, her annual trips to Florida, and her entire lifestyle had been meticulously funded by 3 different custody agreements spanning 25 years. Evelyn hadn't held a tax-paying job since the 90s. She had treated childbirth as a capital investment strategy, and Jessica had been raised as her apprentice. The change didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, calculated shift in the atmosphere of the small brick house David had worked so hard to buy, outright before his wedding. For the first 6 months, Jessica maintained the illusion. She spoke of finishing her degree in dental hygiene, of wanting to contribute to the household. But the moment the marriage certificate was filed with Montgomery County, the books she had bought for her classes were boxed up and moved to the dark corners of the garage. "I'm just so exhausted, Dave," she would say, lying on the couch while the television hummed with daytime talk shows. "My anxiety is just too high right now with the economy. I think it's better if I focus on keeping the home stable." David, wanting to be the supportive husband, accepted it. He took on more overtime. He began working Saturdays, taking on the heavy diesel trucks that the other mechanics in the shop avoided because the work was backbreaking. He'd come home at 8 in the evening, his knuckles bleeding from slipped wrenches, to find the sink piled high with dirty dishes and Jessica on the phone with Evelyn. He would overhear fragments of their conversations from the dark hallway. "No, Mom, he doesn't have an LLC for the shop yet. It's still a sole proprietorship." "Yeah, I checked the tax returns from last year. He cleared 85 after expenses." "No, the house is only in his name, but we're using his income to pay the property taxes now." When David asked about it, Jessica would smooth her hair and smile. "Mom's just helping me understand our financial future, honey. We need to be smart." The real trap sprung when Jessica found out she was pregnant. The news filled David with an old-fashioned, soaring joy. He was going to be a father. He immediately went to work renovating the small spare room, painting it a soft pink after the ultrasound confirmed they were having a girl. He built the crib with his own hands out of solid oak, sanding the edges until they were as smooth as silk. But as Jessica's belly grew, her demeanor hardened. The fragile, helpless girl from the auto shop vanished completely, replaced by a cold, demanding supervisor. "I need a new car, David," she announced one evening, pushing away a plate of takeout food he had bought because she refused to cook. "The Civic isn't safe for a baby. I need an SUV, a Grand Cherokee, the limited edition. Jess, we can't afford a $500 car payment right now," David said, his voice exhausted. "The medical bills for the delivery are going to be high, and the shop had a slow month." Jessica's face transformed, her lips curling into a sneer he had never seen before. "You think my child deserves to ride around in a death trap because you can't run your business, right? My mom told me you'd do this, trying to keep me trapped in this house with no reliable transportation." "Trapped? Jess, I'm working 65 hours a week. Then work 75, she screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "You're the man. That's your job. If you can't handle it, maybe I need to find someone who can." When little Lily was born, David thought things would settle. He held his daughter in the hospital room, looking down at her tiny, perfect fingers, and wept. He promised her, silently, that he would protect her from everything dark in this world. But inside the home, the atmosphere became toxic. Jessica completely checked out of maternal duties within 3 months. She hired a part-time nanny using David's credit card, claiming postpartum exhaustion, while she spent her days at upscale shopping centers in Beaver Creek or getting her nails done with her mother. David would come home from a grueling day at the shop, pay the nanny out of his own pocket, wash his daughter's bottles, feed her, change her, and rock her to sleep while Jessica sat in the next room, scrolling through social media, ordering expensive clothes that still had the tags on them in the closet. The emotional abuse escalated into something physical on a Thursday in October. David had come home to find Lily crying in her crib, her diaper soaked through to her clothes, while Jessica was on the back porch, drinking wine with a neighbor. When David gently confronted her, "Jess, please, she's been sitting in a wet diaper for God knows how long," Jessica exploded. She stormed into the kitchen, her eyes wild. "Don't you dare criticize my parenting. You're never here. You're just a grease monkey who smells like garbage." "I'm working to pay for that wine in your hand," David yelled back, his patience finally snapping. Jessica lunged forward. Her fingernails racked across David's cheek, drawing deep, bloody lines down his face. She grabbed a heavy ceramic coffee mug from the counter and hurled it at his head. It missed, shattering against the drywall, leaving a dark coffee stain and a deep dent in the plaster. Instinctively, David grabbed her wrists to stop her from striking him again. He didn't push her. He just held her arms still, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Let go of me," she shrieked. "Let go of me, or I'll call the police. You know what happens to men like you in this state. I'll tell them you hit me. I'll tell them you touched Lily. Look at your hands, David. Look at mine. Who do you think the judge is going to believe? David looked down at his own massive, grease-stained hands holding her small white wrists. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over him. He realized, with absolute clarity, that he was caught in a system where his physical strength wasn't a protection. It was a liability. He released her immediately and stepped back, his hands raised in surrender. Jessica smiled, a slow, triumphant expression that chilled him to the bone. "That's what I thought," she whispered. "Now get out of my sight." 3 weeks later, David was served with divorce papers while he was underneath a Ford F-150, replacing a starter motor. The deputy sheriff who handed him the document didn't look him in the eye. The paperwork was devastating. Jessica wasn't just asking for a divorce. She was alleging volatile behavior, demanding sole legal and physical custody of Lily, exclusive use of the marital home, and temporary child support and spousal alimony that amounted to nearly 60% of David's net monthly income. David immediately hired an attorney, a tired-looking man named Marcus Vance, who specialized in family law. In Vance's cramped office, David laid out his case. "I have proof she doesn't take care of the kid. I have text messages where she says she's going to lie to the cops. I have the pictures of my face after she scratched me." Vance sighed, tapping a yellow legal pad with his pen. "David, let me give you the reality of the Montgomery County Family Court. You're a business owner. She's a stay-at-home mother with an infant. The court operates on a primary caregiver presumption. Unless you have video evidence of her actively putting the child in mortal danger, she gets the kid. And because she gets the kid, she gets the house, and she gets your livelihood." "But she attacked me!" David shouted, slamming his palm on the desk. "And if you bring that up without a police report from that exact night, her lawyer will claim you're using classic counter-accusations to minimize your own domestic violence," Vance said flatly. "Did you call the police that night?" "No. I didn't want my daughter to see her mother arrested. Then as far as the state of Ohio is concerned, it didn't happen. If we fight this to a full trial, you'll spend $40,000 in legal fees, and the statutory guidelines will still give her roughly the same amount. The system is designed to maintain the status quo for the child, David, and the status quo is that you work and she stays home." The final divorce decree was a masterclass in legal extraction. Because the house had been David's before the marriage, it was technically separate property, but the court ruled that Jessica was entitled to half of the home's equity appreciation during their marriage, plus a distributive award because she had no independent income. To pay her off without selling his grandfather's shop, David had to take out a massive secondary mortgage on the commercial property. When it came to support, the state's automated calculator was cold and unyielding. David's income was verified through his tax returns. Jessica's income was set at 0. The math produced an unmanageable sum: $1,800 a month in child support, plus another $1,200 a month in rehabilitative spousal support for 4 years. On top of that, David was granted standard visitation every other weekend, from Friday evening to Sunday evening, and 1 weeknight dinner. On the day the final papers were signed, David sat in his truck outside the courthouse. He looked at his bank account statement on his phone. Between the legal fees, the mortgage payment on the shop, and the automated state garnishments, he was left with exactly $950 a month to live on. He could no longer afford his own home. He had to rent a small, damp, one-bedroom apartment above a noisy laundromat in a rough part of town. Jessica, meanwhile, remained in the brick house, her lifestyle funded entirely by the state-enforced transfer of David's labor. A month after the divorce was finalized, David came to pick up Lily for his weekend. A brand new Jeep Grand Cherokee Limited was parked in the driveway. Evelyn was sitting on the front porch, watching him with a look of supreme satisfaction. Jessica walked out, handing him Lily's diaper bag. She was wearing a new designer tracksuit. "Don't be late bringing her back on Sunday, David," Jessica said coldly. "The state tracks compliance, you know. And if you're late on the payment next month, my lawyer already has the motion for contempt drafted." David said nothing. He strapped his 1-year-old daughter into the car seat of his old work truck. He looked into her big, innocent blue eyes and forced a smile through the crushing weight in his chest. "Hey there, baby girl," he whispered. "Daddy's got you. Everything's going to be okay." Behind him, on the porch, Evelyn turned to Jessica and raised her glass of wine. "You see?" she told her daughter, loud enough for David to hear over the rumbling exhaust. "An honest man is the most predictable investment there is." For the next 10 years, David lived like a ghost. He woke at 5 in the morning, worked until his muscles burned, ate cheap canned soup over his workbench, and spent every penny he had left on making sure Lily had everything she needed during her short weekends with him. He didn't date. He didn't buy new clothes. His boots were held together by shoe glue and black duct tape. When the shop needed a new hydraulic lift, he couldn't afford it, so he worked on his back on the cold concrete, his older joints popping in protest. But while David was refining his survival, Jessica's world was beginning to rot from the inside out, following the exact law of diminishing returns that governs all unearned wealth. With $3,000 a month arriving like clockwork from the Ohio Child Support Central Direct Debit System, Jessica didn't see the need to find work or finish her education. To her, the money wasn't a temporary safety net for her daughter. It was a permanent salary for her existence. In 2003, when Lily was 5, Jessica met a man named Mark, a smooth-talking 30-something entrepreneur who wore fake gold chains, spent his days at local sports books, and spoke loudly about his upcoming investments in cryptocurrency and real estate. Mark didn't have a job, but he had a late-model BMW with a modified exhaust and a predatory sense for women with guaranteed revenue streams. Within 6 months, Mark had moved into the brick house David had built. Lily, now old enough to speak and observe, became David's window into the house of cards. During their weekend drives, she would talk from the back seat in the casual, devastating way children do. "Mark was screaming at Mommy again last night," Lily said one Saturday morning, her small hands clutching a stuffed bear David had bought her for her birthday. He said she was stingy with the debit card. Mommy was crying and gave him the card so he would stop hitting the wall. David's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. "Did he hit Mommy, Lily? Did he ever touch you?" "No," Lily whispered, looking out the window. "He just yells a lot. Mommy says men are all pigs who just want to control women. But Mark is different because he's going to make us rich." David took a deep, shuddering breath, controlling the rage that threatened to make him turn the truck around. He had tried calling Child Protective Services twice before. Both times, a social worker had gone to the house, found a clean kitchen, a stocked fridge bought with David's money, and a cooperative Jessica who claimed her ex-husband was obsessive and vindictive. The case files were closed within 48 hours. By 2008, the 4 years of David's spousal support had long expired, cutting Jessica's monthly income by more than a third. At the same time, Mark's investments had materialized into nothing but a severe gambling addiction and a taste for high-end bourbon. The brick house, neglected for a decade, was showing its age. The roof was missing shingles after a spring storm, leading to a dark, moldy water stain on the living room ceiling. The beautiful oak crib David had built had been sold on Facebook Marketplace for $75 to cover a weekend loss at the local casino. One evening, David came to drop Lily off after a weekend visit. The front yard was overgrown, the grass reaching Lily's knees. As David walked his daughter to the door, the volume inside the house was deafening. "You stupid bitch!" Mark's voice roared through the screen door. "The check cleared on the 5th. Where is the rest of it? I know you have more tucked away. That's Lily's school clothing money." Jessica screamed back, her voice ragged and thin, stripped of the old arrogance she used to wield against David. "I can't give you any more. The mortgage is 2 months behind. I don't give a shit about her clothes. Give me the card." There was the sound of a heavy shatter, a lamp or a bottle, followed by Jessica's sharp cry of pain. David didn't hesitate. He pushed Lily behind his back, kicked the screen door completely open, and stepped into the house. The living room was a disaster. Stacks of Amazon boxes were piled against the walls, dust covered the furniture, and Mark was standing over Jessica, his fist clenched, his face red with alcohol-fueled rage. Jessica was on the floor, her lip bleeding, looking up in absolute terror. When Mark saw David's 6'2" grease-stained frame filling the doorway, his bravado vanished. Mechanics are built from iron and heavy lifting. Mark was built from vape pens and low-tier gym routines. "Who the fuck are you?" Mark stammered, stepping back. "Get out of this house," David said. His voice wasn't loud. It was low, steady, and carried the terrifying weight of a man who had spent 12 years suppressing every emotion he owned. "If you're still here in 30 seconds, I'm going to use those tools in my truck to dismantle you." Mark looked at David's forearms, looked at the quiet fury in his eyes, and chose survival. He grabbed his keys from the counter, brushed past David with a weak curse, and fled down the driveway, his BMW screeching away into the twilight. David turned to look at his ex-wife. She was sitting on the floor, weeping, her expensive highlights grown out, showing heavy gray roots. She looked 10 years older than her actual age. For a second, just a fraction of a second, David felt an old urge to reach down and help her up. Then he looked at the wall where the coffee mug had shattered 12 years ago. He looked at the stained carpet, the piles of useless consumer goods, and the face of the woman who had used the law to tear his life to pieces. He didn't offer her a hand. "Are you okay, Lily?" David asked, turning his back completely on Jessica to face his daughter. "Yes, Daddy," the 12-year-old said, trembling. David turned to Jessica, his face a mask of stone. "The child support is automatically deducted from my account every month. If I find out she misses a single meal, or if that man comes back around her, I won't call the cops. I'll call the judge for a custody modification, and I'll bring the police reports from tonight." Jessica looked up at him, her eyes filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and dependency. "You think you're better than me?" She spat, wiping the blood from her lip. "You're just a mechanic. This house is mine. The law says you pay me." "The law keeps you alive, Jessica," David said softly. "But it isn't going to save you from yourself. The most tragic thing about human nature is not that people fail to learn from their parents, but that they learn the wrong lessons with absolute religious devotion." Lily grew up in a house where the air was thick with resentment. After Mark finally left for good, taking Jessica's remaining savings and the title to the Grand Cherokee with him, Jessica's sole emotional outlet became the systematic poisoning of her daughter's mind. David did everything he could during his limited time. He taught Lily how to change her own oil, how to balance a checkbook, and tried to show her what a quiet, respectful life looked like. But he had her 4 days a month. Jessica had her 26. By the time Lily was 17, the transformation was accelerating. She had her mother's sharp beauty and her grandmother's cold, evaluating gaze. David would pick her up and notice the way she spoke about her high school boyfriends. "He's nice," Lily said one afternoon, looking at her phone while David drove her to a diner. "But his family doesn't have money. He drives a rusted-out Civic. I told him if he wants to take me to prom, he needs to borrow his dad's truck. A girl has standards." David felt a cold finger of dread touch his spine. "Lily, a car doesn't make the man. Is he good to you? Does he work hard?" "Hard work doesn't pay the bills, Dad," Lily said, her voice an exact mimicry of Jessica's old cadence. "Mom says a woman's biggest mistake is settling for a man who expects her to work alongside him. The man provides, that's his purpose." Your mother hasn't worked a day in 20 years, Lily, David said, his voice tightening despite his best efforts. And look at that house. Look at how she lives. Is that what you want? She was cheated by the system, Lily snapped, turning on him with sudden fire. She told me how you used your lawyers to take her money after the divorce. She told me how you tried to control her. David closed his mouth. He looked out at the Ohio landscape, the gray winter fields rushing past. He realized then that the truth was too heavy a stone to throw at his own daughter. The system had allowed Jessica to construct a narrative where she was the victim, and Lily had swallowed the lie whole because it offered an easy shortcut through life. In 2021, at 23, Lily met Tyler. Tyler was 26, a soft-spoken, incredibly industrious young man who had graduated from a trade school and started a successful commercial HVAC business in Columbus. He was exactly the kind of man David had been 25 years earlier. Honest, trusting, and raised with the belief that a good woman was someone you cherished and protected. The emotional abuse escalated into something physical on a Thursday in October. David had come home to find Lily crying in her crib, her diaper soaked through to her clothes, while Jessica was on the back porch drinking wine with a neighbor. When David gently confronted her, "Jess, please, she's been sitting in a wet diaper for God knows how long," Jessica exploded. She stormed into the kitchen, her eyes wild. "Don't you dare criticize my parenting. You're never here. You're just a grease monkey who smells like garbage." "That's great, Tyler," David said, his voice heavy with a deep prophetic sorrow. "It's hard work running a business. Make sure you keep your books clean. Keep your personal and business accounts entirely separate." Tyler smiled, naive and confident. "Oh, absolutely, Mr. Miller. My dad taught me to be careful, but Lily's been great with helping me think about the future. She's got a lot of big ideas." David looked across the table at his daughter. Lily was smiling, but her eyes were fixed on the luxury watch Tyler had bought himself to celebrate his company's 3rd anniversary. It was the exact same smile Jessica had given him when he fixed her brakes for free in the 3rd bay of Miller & Sons Auto. 2 years later, in 2023, Lily and Tyler were married. David attended the wedding. He sat in the 3rd row, watching his daughter walk down the aisle in a $20,000 gown, paid for entirely by Tyler's corporate credit line. Jessica was on the bride's side, dressed in an oversized, ostentatious fur coat she had bought on credit, her face tightened by cheap cosmetic procedures, looking around the country club venue like a general surveying a conquered territory. During the reception, Jessica passed David near the bar. She paused, her martini glass trembling slightly in her hand. "Look at her," Jessica whispered, a bitter, triumphant hiss. "She did what I couldn't do completely. She got a man who actually makes real money. She'll never have to smell like transmission fluid, David." David looked at his ex-wife. He was 59 now. His hair was entirely silver. His shop was finally paid off. And he had recently bought a small, quiet cabin near a lake where he spent his Sundays fishing. He felt no anger left for her, only a profound, hollow pity. "You think this is a victory, Jess?" David said softly. "You didn't teach her how to be a wife. You taught her how to be a predator. But you forgot one thing." "Oh, and what's that, grease monkey?" "Men like Tyler aren't like men from your generation," David said, his voice flat and cool. "The world has changed. The internet has changed things. Young men aren't as blind as I was. If she pushes him too hard, she's going to find out that the trap doesn't work the same way twice." The collapse of Lily's marriage took exactly 3 years. Lily had moved into the Dublin mansion with the absolute conviction that her position was unassailable. She immediately stopped her part-time boutique job, spent $10,000 a month on her husband's supplementary credit cards, and began treating Tyler's home as her personal luxury resort. When Tyler came home, exhausted after 12 hours of dealing with frozen commercial chillers in freezing weather, There was no dinner, no warmth, and no peace. There was only Lily, sitting on an Italian leather couch, complaining that the cleaning service had missed a spot in the guest bathroom, while her mother, Jessica, sat beside her, sipping Tyler's expensive wine. The turning point came when Lily became pregnant with their first child. Following the ancestral script passed down from Evelyn to Jessica, Lily assumed that pregnancy was the final binding clause of the contract. Her demands doubled. Her verbal abuse became a daily occurrence. She began openly telling Tyler that he was lucky she allowed him to live in the same house as her child. But David's prediction had been correct. The world of 2026 was not the world of the old days. Tyler wasn't an isolated mechanic working in a small town with a tired lawyer. When Lily's abuse escalated to the point where she threw a heavy crystal vase at his head during an argument about an expensive vacation package, Tyler didn't just stand there and take it. He didn't stay quiet to protect her reputation. Tyler had installed high-definition, cloud-connected security cameras throughout the common areas of the Dublin house for insurance and business security purposes. Every scream, every insult, every thrown object, and every instance of Lily telling him she was going to ruin him in court and take every dime his father made was uploaded automatically to a secure server in the cloud. Furthermore, Tyler's father was a retired corporate accountant. Before the wedding, he had insisted Tyler create a premarital asset trust for his business infrastructure. The HVAC company didn't belong to Tyler. It belonged to an irrevocable trust governed by an independent trustee. In March of 2026, Lily filed for divorce, using the exact language her mother had provided her. She claimed irreconcilable differences and emotional cruelty, demanding the mansion, 80% of Tyler's income in temporary support, and sole custody of their 8-month-old son. She expected a quick surrender. She expected Tyler to crawl, to offer her millions to keep his brand clean. Instead, Tyler's legal team met her in the initial temporary orders hearing with a digital mountain of evidence. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her late 40s who had seen 1,000 identical cases, sat in the Franklin County Domestic Relations Court, while Tyler's lawyer played the living room security footage. The courtroom speakers, filled with Lily's high-pitched, screeching voice. "You're a fucking idiot, Tyler. My mom told me how to handle men like you. You're going to pay for this house while I live in it with my friends, and you're going to sleep in your office. Try to stop me. The court always gives the woman the kid." The judge's face turned into a mask of pure ice as the video played. When the footage ended, Lily's lawyer looked pale, his hands shaking as he tried to shuffle his papers. Lily sat next to him, her mouth slightly open, her old confidence suddenly replaced by a sharp, cold panic. The judge leaned over her bench, looking down at Lily. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, her voice dropping like a heavy guillotine. "The statutory guidelines for child support are designed to ensure the well-being of the child, not to fund a lifestyle of aggressive entitlement, or to subsidize the vindictive strategies of your maternal relatives." The temporary order was a complete inversion of the ancestral script. Because of the clear evidence of domestic volatility and emotional instability recorded on the videos, the judge granted joint residential custody with a 50-50 rotating schedule, eliminating the primary caregiver premium completely. Because Tyler's business was shielded by a premarital trust, his personal income for child support calculations was limited to his base corporate salary, not the company's gross revenue. The final calculation was brutal. Because custody was exactly equal, and Lily had the capacity to work but chose not to, the court imputed an income to her based on her previous employment history. The result? Tyler was ordered to pay just $450 a month in child support. No spousal support was awarded due to the short duration of the marriage and the clear evidence of marital misconduct. Furthermore, the mansion was ordered to be sold immediately, with the proceeds split after the remaining mortgage was paid off. Because Lily had racked up $60,000 in credit card debt during the separation, her share of the equity was completely wiped out to pay off the creditors. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in June, exactly 21 years after Jessica had first walked into David's shop, David was standing in the driveway of his small lake cabin. The water was gray and calm, the trees thick and green around him. He was 62 now, retired, his body healed from the decades of grease and iron. A rusted, older model, Nissan Sentra, pulled into the gravel driveway. The engine was ticking badly, a loose valve lifter that needed immediate attention. The door opened, and Lily stepped out. She looked entirely broken. The sharp country club veneer was gone. She was wearing an old sweatshirt, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, her eyes red and swollen from hours of crying. She looked exactly like her mother had looked on the kitchen floor of the brick house a decade earlier. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking as she walked toward him. "They're evicting me. The apartment. I couldn't make the rent this month. Tyler's check only covers his half of the daycare expenses. My lawyer won't return my calls unless I pay him another $5,000. Mom told me the court would fix it, but they didn't. They took everything." David stood by his truck, his calloused hands resting on the side mirror. He looked at his daughter, the little girl he had built an oak crib for, the woman who had turned her back on everything he had tried to teach her, because she believed the world was an extraction machine. Behind her, in the passenger seat of the ticking Nissan, his 2-year-old grandson was sleeping, his little thumb tucked into his mouth. "Where is your mother, Lily?" David asked quietly. "She told me I was stupid," Lily sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "She said I didn't execute the plan right. She said she couldn't help me with money because her own house is going to sheriff's sale next month." "Dad, please. I have nowhere to go. They're putting my things on the sidewalk tomorrow morning." David looked up at the sky, the cold Ohio rain beginning to fall in earnest. Tapping against the hood of his truck, he felt the immense, heavy geometry of karma, the way the lines of choice and consequence always return to the point of origin, no matter how long the circle takes to close. Jessica had used the system to break him. She had taught her daughter that a man was a resource to be mined until the shaft collapsed, and now the machine had run out of fuel, leaving 2 generations of women standing in the ruins of their own design. David took a deep breath. He walked forward, past his daughter without a single word, and opened the back door of the rusted Nissan. He carefully unbuckled his grandson from the car seat, lifting the sleeping boy into his broad, grease-stained arms. The child was warm, smelling of baby powder and fresh rain. He turned and looked at Lily, his face filled with that same quiet, unyielding strength that had kept him alive through the dark years. "Bring your bags inside, Lily," David said, his voice steady and calm. "You can stay in the spare room. But we're going to change a few things." "What?" she sniffed, looking up through her tears. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to teach you how to adjust the valves on this car so you can get to work," David said, turning toward the cabin door. "And then, we're going to open a savings account for this boy, an account that his mother can't touch, that his grandmother can't touch, and that the state of Ohio can't garnish." He paused on the porch, looking back at her one last time. "An honest life is a hard thing to build, Lily," David said softly. "But it's the only thing that doesn't collapse when the winter comes." Inside the cabin, the light was warm. The wood stove hummed with steady, reliable heat. And for the first time in 30 years, the debt of the Miller family was fully settled.